everyone. Welcome everyone to this guided practice session presented by the Contemplative Study Centre at the University of Melbourne. I'm Dr. Hai Su-sun, Teaching Fellow at the Centre. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we gather. We respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the unceded land on which we work, learn and live, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples. We pay respect to elders past, present, and future, and to any Indigenous people present today. I also want to remind all participants that your well-being is our highest concern, and that by joining this session today, you do so in compliance with the CSC terms and conditions, as you indicated when registering online. Please see the chat for more information on that. And if you are unwilling or unable to comply with the CSC terms and conditions, we respectfully ask that you leave to please leave the session now. We are delighted to welcome Kynan Sutherland to facilitate this guided insight meditation series. Kynan is a Zen Roshi or teacher and spiritual care coordinator working in acute, rehab, residential, and palliative care settings. He is passionate about realizing the Dharma in everyday life and places a strong emphasis on environmental action, social justice, community building, and the arts. If you have any questions, comments, or reflections, please place them in the Q&A at any point during the session, and we will address as many as possible towards the end. Okay, thanks everyone. Welcome, Kynan.
Thank you, Hai Su, for that very warm introduction. And also thank you to Kathleen, who I know is hiding there in the background, but it's been just so helpful in making this season of talks possible right through March. So, as Hai Su mentioned, my name is Kynan, and I'm an authorized Zen teacher in the Diamond Sangha lineage of Zen. This is a lineage that has traveled right, really originally from China, through Japan, to America, and now to Australia. So this is an opportunity for me to share with you just some of the threads, if you like, of Australian Zen practice. How has Zen actually found its soil here? It's a very interesting question, because each place that Zen has traveled, it has found its own expression. So here we are on a country that is very old, very ancient, and of course going to be very influential to the very character of Zen as it grows, blossoms, flowers in this land. So I've put together a series of talks that have what I would really describe as overlapping themes. And I hope the nature of these overlapping themes will become clearer and clearer to you as we walk together over these 4 weeks. And today, I'm going to start with some of the fundamentals of Zen. Always good to start with the fundamentals. Always good to begin with a beginner's mind. That might be an expression that is familiar to some people here. Wiping the slate clean, if you like, stepping into a practice just like this with no expectation, with no knowledge, with no forethought, innocent, if you like, of the kinds of prejudices that usually steer us through the rapids of everyday life. But then in the following week, I would like to explore what I would describe as the bodhisattva ideal. We'll ask, what is a bodhisattva? What is the bodhisattva ideal, and how does that manifest itself or express itself in everyday, ordinary life? After all, this is not a tradition that remains seated on the cushion forever. That's not its purpose. The cushion stands up with us, walks into everything that we do with us. What we learn on the cushion becomes so informative, so revelatory for every single encounter that we have on the path. So that's what I want to take up in the second week. And in the third week, as already mentioned, We sit in Australia, we sit in an ancient place with its own embedded wisdom. I want to take up the theme of the affinities between Zen and Indigenous wisdom, because there are so many, and one can shine a light on the other in very fruitful ways, I think. So this is something that excites me and animates me in particular. So I encourage you all, if you can make it to that session, to tune into the ancient hum of this country and what it might be teaching us, what it might be calling on us, and how it might be calling on us to come home, all the way home in this place. And then lastly, in the fourth week, I want to take up something that's not usually associated with Zen, but of course is fundamental to any sincere practice, and that is playfulness. Playfulness, the spirit of play, of improvisation, of spontaneity, of laughter. If we're not laughing with our practice, then we're missing something. We're missing the great joy that lies at its heart. So playfulness, I think, feels like a pretty good place to end after 4 sessions together. But first I want to, as promised, dive into some of the fundamentals of Zen. And I want to do this by beginning with a kind of cheeky abbreviated history of the tradition. Some of you might be aware that Zen was born in China. In fact, it's the child of Buddhism traveling all the way over the mountains and rivers from India and meeting this strange indigenous wisdom called Taoism. When Buddhism met Taoism, when the two of these rolled together to find a new way of being or a new way of lighting up the practice and the path, it became Chan. And this Chan, so beautifully expressed and held by these old rogues and characters of ancient China, managed to travel not just through China, north and south, but to places like Vietnam, Korea, Japan, then, as I said earlier, America, and now Australia. It's had a long journey, this practice. And of course, we are here to embody and keep that journey alive. That's our practice. Now, when the practice of Chan traveled to places like Japan, its name changed too. It became Zen. But of course, Zen is a transliteration of Chan, which is itself a transliteration of the Sanskrit dhyana, all of which mean meditation. Meditation. So the heart of a Zen practice is meditation. But what is meditation? This is a great question to ask. We take it for granted that there is such a thing, but what is it? What is it that actually is afforded by a practice of sitting down and just being? Well, one of the old, original, and extraordinarily influential teachers of the Chan tradition in China, Zhao, was once asked that very question by a young monk who came and approached him and asked the question that we all have to ask: what is meditation? And Zhao, the old teacher, who could have been anywhere from 100 to 120 years old, responded, "It is not meditation." And the young monk responded with some consternation you can probably appreciate. "Well, if it's not meditation, what is it?" And Zhao said, "It's alive. It's alive." The very living flame of meditation is what I want to touch in this session and over the subsequent sessions. Because it is this flame of practice, the very aliveness of practice, that matters, that makes this so valuable, that literally brings a practice to life. So we'll begin by actually opening up a round of meditation. If Zen is all about meditation, we better get into it. We better leap right into this great question of what meditation is. And of course, this question can only be embodied, not answered. It is an experience, not a theory. We don't solve meditation. We let it inform us to our very marrow. That's its wisdom. That's its great, shining, flaming, bright light. So let me bring up a round of meditation in the traditional Zen way, and that is by simply ringing 3 bells. And I'll just quickly adjust my settings here so that you'll be able to hear these bells, which I've just done. So please sit in whatever position you're comfortable in a chair, lying down, on a cushion, whatever suits you. And let us open wide into these bells. Now, of course, meditation must meet the bodies that we have. It comes home, after all, in this very body. So as I talk about posture here, keep in mind that every single body is different. Every single body has its own demands, has its own periods of transition, has its own quirks and circumstances, and all of them are to be respected here as we sit together. The first thing I draw your attention to as we sit, no matter how you are sitting, is to pay some attention to your spine. If you're sitting upright, allow your spine to be straight. You can actually assist the spine being straight by leaning forward a little bit, pushing the bum out and then rocking back so that there is a tiny little curl at the bottom of the spine. A little bit like the curl you see in babies when they sit so naturally on the floor, holding themselves up without effort. If you're lying down, then a straight spine is equally important, and that curl in the spine equally important. There's a kind of alertness that comes with a straight but relaxed spine. So let it be so. Let yourself be naturally alert. Again, this is one of the gifts of the body. It is, when we allow it to be, naturally alert. Then as you sit or lie where you are, feel the gravitational pull of the earth. It's a beautiful thing that the earth is calling to us. It's almost like a love song, saying, be here, come home, feel me, notice me. You might even be aware of just the warmth in your legs. How wonderful that there is this bodily connection, creaturely connection to the earth itself, which so effortlessly supports us in everything that we're doing. Meditation is an opportunity to notice that, to respect it, to admire it, to wonder about it. And then, of course, let your shoulders soften. Soft shoulders are supple shoulders, available shoulders. They let the whole body be receptive to all that is coming in, streaming in just this very moment. let your chin be just tucked in ever so slightly. If the chin is floating forward, it often means that it's following the drift of thoughts up into the clouds. If it's brought back in, just tucked in ever so gently, it can remain aware without needing to chase after delusory thoughts. And then you might like to try the traditional Zazen mudra. Zazen is our Zen word for meditation, seated meditation. And the mudra is simply this. It is your right hand turned upward, resting in your lap, with your left hand then cradled by the right, and the two thumbs gently touching. It is such a simple mudra. And as it sits there, balanced in your lap, be aware of the pressure of your thumbs. Too much pressure means pressured being, means something is being forced. Not enough pressure means that the thumbs separate and drift apart. The traditional advice was to imagine a piece of thin rice paper between those two thumbs. You should be able to hold that rice paper without piercing it or without crumpling it and without letting it fall. This is the kind of middle way, the sweet point of any true meditation practice. Held tall, but unforced. What a dignified and natural state of being this turns out to be. And then, of course, we breathe. Breathing is the one continuous gift that we are given right through a life. We take our first breath when we are born. We exhale our last breath when we die. And for the rest of the time, for the complete time in which we sit, we are the beneficiaries of this breath, the custodians, if you like, of this breath. And this breath doesn't need to be forced. You don't need to intentionally breathe long or short breaths. Just notice how the breath comes in through the nostril, out through the nostril. This is so easy. Just noticing that the breath comes in, that the breath flows out. There's no right or wrong breath. The miracle is that the breath is breathing itself. No one is doing it. You do not intentionally need to breathe your own breath. The breath is breathing you. So as we sit, noticing our breath, noticing the astonishing character of each breath, the way it vanishes into almost nothing, but then turns from this nothing back into the next breath, one breath becoming the other. We can begin to ask ourselves, how do we practice on the cushion? How do we practice with this breath? How do we actually come alive in the way that Zhao described? Well, to explore this a little bit, I want to take up another case that is actually an encounter between this same Zhao, the one who said that meditation is alive, and his teacher. This goes all the way back to when Zhao was a young man, a very young monk, inquiring of his teacher into the way, into the Dharma, into why it is that we practice. And so Zhao, as a young man, asked his teacher, what is the way? In fact, he asked, what is the Tao? Underscoring the fact that Buddhism and Taoism were mixing together here, finding a voice together, asking a shared question. So what is the Tao? Asked this young monk to his teacher. And his teacher responded, ordinary mind. Ordinary mind is the Tao. I wonder how this strikes you. I wonder what you hear in this word, ordinary. We're so used to describing things, particularly in Australian slang, as ordinary, as if they're banal or base or not worthy. Ordinary is a kind of diminishment. But actually, ordinary things, even a spoon, even a desk, even the passage of light from the window into the room onto the floor in which you sit, so ordinary, but so extraordinary at the very same time. Ordinary mind is the mind that exists before we have made ourselves up, before we have launched into opinions about that spoon, about that light, about even the breeze coming in under the door. Ordinary mind is just what is here. And thankfully, mercifully, it cannot be grasped. It cannot be possessed. The mind that we so commonly employ in our wanderings through everyday life is possessive, accumulative, consumerist. It wants to have all the time. It wants to own. It wants to control. It wants to dominate. It fears that if it doesn't do these things, it's lost or that it will vanish. But ordinary mind sits comfortably in the most relaxed and upright and stable way, just like the earth, before these concerns, before these moves of the panicked mind. So breathing in, this is ordinary. Breathing out, this is ordinary. Noticing every flow of sensation, sound, sight, taste, touch, thought. Just noticing how ordinary these are, how unhurried, in fact, they are in their own way, if we allow them to be. This is what old Nanshuan, the teacher of Jiao Zhou, is pointing to. But Jiao Zhou was an impressive young man. And any impressive, sincere student of a practice like Zen will ask more questions. This is, after all, a tradition of questions, a tradition that is brought to life by dialogue, by the exchange of inquiry. So Jiao Zhou presses his teacher a little bit further and says, well, if ordinary mind is the way, then should I try to direct myself towards it or not? This is a very good question. Do we direct ourselves towards a practice or not? Do we tailor ourselves to some kind of projected end, to some kind of perfect practice or not? Well, Nanshuan responded, if you direct yourself, you deviate. Or in another translation, if you turn towards it, it turns away from you. This is a very delicate, nuanced place to be. Not pushing forward, but not turning away either. Meditation is the exploration of exactly this sweet place that does not turn towards and does not turn away. And this is brought to life in a very old sutra from the Indian tradition. I'll share it with you now because it touches on this point. in a very exquisite way, I think. And these are the words of the Buddha, coming right from his original teaching to us here now, today. So the Buddha was approached by a diva. Always good to be approached by a diva. Always pay attention if a diva approaches you and asks a question. And the diva says, "Tell me, dear sir, how you crossed the flood." And you could take this flood as the kind of swirl of everyday experience, of samsara in the Buddhist lingo, of the distressing and pressing currents of all that is happening in the world. And we know that there is so much happening in the world, so much heaving into us at every point. So this diva wants to know, how did you cross the flood? And the Buddha responded, "I crossed the flood without pushing forward and without staying in place." What an interesting response. The diva pushed back a little bit further. "But how, dear sir, did you cross over the flood without pushing forward and without staying in place?" The Buddha responded, "When I pushed forward, I was whirled about. When I stayed in place, I sank. And so I crossed the flood without pushing forward and without staying in place." I wonder if you can hear just how alive this is. Alive without pressure. Alive without being forced. Alive by not pushing forward, not turning toward. And alive by not staying in place, not getting stuck, not sinking or wallowing in what it is that we fear is so important or so crippling. So we do this by accepting each breath and moving with each breath. After all, the Tao or the path or the Dharma, or whatever it is that you want to call it, moves. It moves. And our practice is to agree with this movement, to move with, to resemble, if you like, to become a complete fit with the movement itself, and to realize in time that we have been nothing but this movement our entire lives, never astray. We have never been one hair's breadth apart from the movement that has animated us from the very beginning and which will animate us beyond life and death, right through the Dharma gate of life and death. We move. And when we move with our circumstances, which is, of course, the very heart of a true Zen practice, when we move with what is happening, the barrier that we so obsessively erect between inside and outside begins to dissolve, to give way, to lose its appeal, to grow dull and stubborn looking. In fact, to grow irrelevant to the true moving current that we are. Because after all, we all move together. This is plain as day when we look out the window, or when we walk down the corridor, or when we enter a room full of people having their lunch. We all move together. It is an ensemble that we are. And what this reveals is that there is nothing but relationship, that we exist as pure relationship. There is no me versus you. That is not even a me, comma, and you. There is only me and you. Me and you, with a hyphen that runs right through those words. Me and you, no other. All exquisitely particular in our difference. Each one of us a remarkable expression of the Dharma itself, but not separate, not estranged, not islanded somehow, as if my life was over here and your life was over there. No. My life is your life. Your life is my life. And waking up to this means that finally, happily, joyfully, we can be some use in this suffering world, in this world that has more than its fair share of pain. And so I want to give an example from my own life and practice of what it's like to move with ordinary mind into ordinary situations that involve pain, real suffering, real challenge, and yet to move with, not away from what is going, to cross this river or cross this flood without pushing forward and without staying in place. And the example I want to give happened to me just recently while I was working at the hospital, where I spend much of my time working with people in periods of great change, often approaching death, often dying, often grieving very challenging and difficult shifts that go to the very core of who and what they have imagined themselves to be, up until the point they find themselves stripped of the luxury of knowing who they are at all. And this encounter happened in an aged care facility where I was just walking down the corridor and noticed a woman that I will call Mary, although I won't give her real name, who was sitting unusually in a chair in the middle of the corridor. And I knew Mary. I'd spent quite a bit of time with Mary in the past. And I stopped and turned and walked over to her and sat down and said, "How are you going?" And she turned to me and said, "What's your name?" Now, as I said, I'd spent so much time with this woman. It was not an unfamiliar question, but I just answered simply, "Kynan. Kynan is my name." She paused and she took this in, and then she said, "What's my name?" I said, "Your name is Mary." And then she said, "What are we doing here?" I said, "We're being together. We're speaking together." She said, "Am I supposed to be somewhere?" I said, "You're exactly where you need to be." Taking my arm, she said, "You're lovely." Smiling, I said back to her, "You're lovely." And then she looked at me quite sternly and she said, "No, I'm amazing." And we both roared with laughter in that corridor. How extraordinary, how ordinary to simply be with someone, to simply meet beyond time, beyond the pressures of tick-tock time, to meet in a place of profound not knowing, a place that is not anticipated. After all, we call this meditation, not premeditation. We practice to be absolutely responsive to each other, to find the appropriate response, and each situation. And this doesn't need to be grandiose. It doesn't need to be some special gesture. Ordinary mind is the Tao, as Nanchuan so succinctly expressed it. So, as we sit here now, sitting quietly with ordinary mind, I will finish by ringing the bells and then inviting any questions that may have come up as I've spoken with you this afternoon. But thank you for your trouble, for being here.
Thank you, Kynan. I just give people a few minutes to come up with questions. But before that, I have my own question to ask you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned this very important concept called ordinary mind. It seems to be captured very perfectly in the story you tell in the end, the profoundness of the ordinary mind meeting another ordinary mind. I wonder what kept us from having access to this ordinary mind in everyday life. What are the things that stop us to see it or to be with it, or yeah.
This sounds like a question that comes from genuine experience of feeling the blockage, the kind of sometimes feels like a sheet of glass between our true being and the world. Yeah, what might you say? That's just because we can actually speak with each other, like this. What might you say blocks you from the almost innocent childlike state of being completely with the world? What blocks you?
So many things. TikTok, the next task, the meeting I have to go to. I'm hungry. I think just so many things constantly occupied me one after another.
Yeah. And always so tempting to grasp after those things, to hold on to those things, to be almost yanked off up into the ether with those things. So meditation, of course, is an opportunity to let that grasping mind relax, to actually afford ourselves even just 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 25 minutes of simply being without following those bullying thoughts. They often are. They're so demanding, those thoughts. They always say, I'm the most important. You must follow along with me. Well, in Zen, we actually take the opportunity to fast the mind, a little bit like fasting with food. We fast the mind. And we all know what it's like to taste something after you've fasted. It tastes really good. So even a simple thought after we've fasted the mind can be a very tasty thought, and we can appreciate it much more. So thoughts are not the problem. It's our chasing of those thoughts that is the great practice to let go of. Yeah.
Very much. Here's a question that I want to pass on to you. The question is about how to attain the calmness in our mind in this restless world, which I totally agree, with spontaneous thoughts and commitments we ought to meet through this Zen meditation.
Yeah. Great question. And it essentially boils down to trust. Can you trust that at heart, in your heart of hearts, it is calm? That the very foundation of our being, so calmly supported by the earth itself, calm, calm. This is the great open secret, that we're already like this. We are already calm if we allow ourselves to be. That's the practice. That's the practice. So to trust that it is already so, and then to experience that with your entire being. That's Zen.
Oh, this is very profound. Yeah. I remember the metaphor you give, the gravity, like the gravity we drawn to the earth is effortless. Is it similar to this calmness that we trust that we already have is already there? Or
Great way of actually saying, if you can trust that loving call of the earth to come back home, if you can trust that it will actually welcome you all the way back home, you will find your place exactly where you are.
thank you. Thank you. Another question here, which I find very interesting, it's does entering into a meditation session with intention, for example, to release the day's to release the tension from the day, conflict with the ordinary mind, and not walking forward.
Another great question. Intentionality is a very interesting proposition. Of course, when we do sit down, there is intention there. Our intention is simply to be. We're actually saying, I am going to simply be for this, whatever space of time I've agreed to myself that I'm going to do. That's enough. Intention only becomes problematic if we are aspiring to some kind of particular end. It might be that you are determined to be calm. Well, that's already interrupting the natural calm that you can surrender to just by sitting. You don't and can never know exactly how that calm is going to express itself in your full body. So imagining it, having a kind of, again, it's a bit like a pre-meditation, putting that in front of your meditation can in itself be a subtle block. So to have the intention to sit, wonderful. But then open yourself up to the wonder. Then open yourself up to the discovery of what this is. How deep does it go? Does it go deeper than deep? Let's find out.
We probably have time for just one more question. So there's a question. I'm just going to read out the whole comment. I'm very grateful for the meditation. It makes me aware of my own thought process where I'm unable to accept the change in my life that comes with chronic illness. What I could have been was also an imagination. I could look at it as only that instead of a sense of loss. Yeah, is anything we can sort of, yeah.
That is such a beautiful message. And again, at the heart of that message is the very turn that we emphasize in a Zen practice, which is turning with circumstances, moving with what moves. And that is both a profound acceptance of our circumstances and also a profound relinquishment of any kind of attachment we have to those circumstances. These two, in fact, are not two. They don't need to be done in turn. They are the turning themselves. So the way that person has expressed their deep acceptance and how they have recognized that the stories that they invent about how things should have been or could have been or might have been or could still be, when we let those go, we can actually settle into the calm of who and what we actually are, just as we are. We always like to say in Zen, if you can't go through just as you are, you can't go through.
Thank you very much for all the profound teaching today. Already 1:45, so I think it's time to close the session. Thank you, Kynan, and thank you all the audience for, as Kynan said, you are me, I'm you. We create this together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll see you next time.